All right, I think we are live. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the stream. Today, we are going to discuss about the reliability of the eyewitness testimonies, the accounts of the crucifixion, and the biblical text in general. We'll also be responding to Korra. Korra is somebody that went viral for lying, continuously lying on with people who don't know a lot, and likewise, she getting humbled by people who actually know, like God logic and so on and so forth, other people. So today we'll be making a response to that, and we also have some refutations from decorated detective, a homicide detective. I'll give more information about him as we go on. But let me welcome Adam on stream. Hi, Adam. Welcome to the stream. Adam has the YouTube channel, The Christian Warner. It's a great source for information regarding apologetics, biblical studies, and everything Jesus related. So welcome to the stream, Adam.
This is gonna be a good one. I'm looking forward to it.
Awesome, that's great. So also just for the people who might be joining in, the link is in the chat, so you can ask us anything about Jesus. On the topic that we are doing, any questions about Jesus, you can post it, and within the context of today's stream, we'll try to answer it. So let me get started. Are you able to see the screen, Adam?
Yes, I can see it.
All right, let me make it full
Oh, I
screen.
think was if I'm not mistaken, was God Logic's wife there or something, or was that a different
Yeah,
one?
she's also one of the participants. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember this.
All right. So let me just test for audio. Are you able to hear the audio?
Play it again. I think I can, but it's very low.
Oh, I'm not sure how I would increase that actually. Is it the system volume that needs to be increased?
Oh, it could be my volume, to be honest with you. Try again.
Okay.
Hi, Korra. I'm Raisha. Hi, I'm Delaney. Hi, nice to meet you guys. All right, so
How's it doing?
Okay, for some reason it's increasing. Yeah, when they start talking, it increases. It starts off low, but then when they start talking, it becomes more audible.
Okay. Yeah, let me just continue. You can let me know if it's too low. We will just try to change something around. Also, all right. Yeah.
My position on the crucifixion of Jesus is that rather than him being crucified at the hands of both the Jews and the Romans, he was saved and raised to the second heaven by God. God did not
pause that,
allow
Daniel.
the soul to harm him in that.
So I just give you feedback in terms of the audio, just so you know. You sound fine, like you sound loud. The video
Okay.
is also, I would say, it's not terribly low, like it's audible. But if you could if you could find a way to make the video a little higher, it would be, I think, more beneficial for the people listening. Because I just have to strain my ear a little bit to hear it. You can hear it, but I have to strain a little bit.
Yeah. Let me see. I don't think there's a specific option to do that, but I'll try to switch to Chrome and see if it works.
Ultimately, the other thing as well is anyone watching, when the video is playing, what you can do is for those moments when the video is playing, you can just turn up your sound. And then when we start talking, turn it down again, because obviously it'd be too loud when we start speaking. It just seems that the audio is a little disproportionate between the video and then you speaking. Like you speaking, you're fine, like you're loud, but then the video is like it's much
Got it.
lower.
Yeah, what I'm trying now is I'll just earlier it was on the Microsoft Edge. Now I'll just try to go on the Chrome actually. Let me try that. Okay. Share screen again. All right, let me play and let's see.
Hi, I'm Delaney. Hi, nice to meet you guys. All right, so my position on the crucifixion of Jesus is that rather than him being crucified.
So that's a Chrome helping us.
Way better, way louder.
All right, that's great. Let's go ahead then.
crucified at the hands of both the Jews and the Romans, he was saved and raised to the second heaven by God. God did not allow a soul to harm him in that instance in terms of death and so on, right? And I obviously believe that although you guys believe that Jesus was crucified and that that theology is echoed within Christianity and so on and so forth, I do not believe that this is an undisputed fact, not just extra-biblically, but even within the Bible, due to a multi...
Okay, how many lies did you catch there, Adam?
Quite a few. I mean, first and foremost, from a historical lens, it is an undisputed fact that he was crucified. And then to suggest, even biblically speaking, within the New Testament, it's not undisputed. That's also a lie. There was a plethora of lies there. I mean, none of what she said was true, but anyway.
Yeah. So I'm not sure which scholars or authors, historians she's appealing to.
Yeah.
We can,
Zakir
we will
Naik,
just, yeah, Zakir Naik maybe. Yeah.
Multitude of different inconsistencies and so on and so forth. So what are you guys' thoughts on that?
I think that's interesting because the crucifixion of Jesus is the most well-known historically attested event, not only by biblical sources, but also extra biblical sources. So I know that your Quran mentions that it only made for him to appear that way, but it just confuses me. We have all these historical evidence and the historians written about this, but 600 years later, you have Allah saying that it only appeared that way. So how does that make sense?
Okay, beautiful. So the Quran isn't actually the only instance in which somebody disputes the crucifixion taking place. We have historians also acknowledging, the same exact historians that you will appeal to say that the crucifixion happened, also say that there were early groups disputing the crucifixion, right? For example, we have groups such as the Basilidians who deny the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, and they also believe that somebody else was crucified in his place, right? They believe in something called substitution theory. We also have...
Yeah, she's waffling because what she's talking about are the Gnostics, and this argument is so fallacious. It's to me, it's frustrating to have to hear that, and the fact she thinks she can get away with it. So again. Okay, so just for those who don't know, it's in one of Irenaeus's works. I think it's his book Against Heresies. I think it's like book 1 or 2, chapter 24. I can't remember where it is, but basically, I have a section on this where he talks about the Basilides, and Basilides had a specific view of substitution.
Yeah.
But Basilides' view of substitution was based on his dualistic understanding of God. Okay, as far as Christ is concerned. Okay. So the Gnostic position was that Christ was so divine, he didn't have a physical body, okay? And for him to be crucified, it wouldn't make sense given their understanding of Christ as being something totally spiritual because he was this all benevolent being in the flesh, okay? Yeah. Or that had come in sort of a form that was that they could see, that was observable, but they didn't believe he had a physical body. That's why that understanding or that hypothesis came up among these groups because that was their view of Christ. Their view of Christ was not the Muslim view of Christ, which is that he was just a man, just a prophet, and therefore Allah, because of the specific view of prophethood that they have in Islam, Allah preserved him from death because he wouldn't allow that to happen, one of his prophets, in line with what the Quran says. That's not Basilides' position. You're reading that into Basilides' position. You're reading that into these Gnostic groups, but it's not true. It doesn't have historical grounding. And yeah, the Islamic interpretation is its own separate thing.
Yeah. So first of all, she said that the Basilides was an early group, but we know from history it's a 2nd century group. So I'm not sure why she's identifying them as the early group. Early group will be within the 1st century, and more specifically, I would say within the 70 AD narrative where everything burned down and things happened. But anyway, just like you pointed out, this is from an article by Bart Ehrman. So he lays out the case for Basilides, right? Just like you said, Adam, many Gnostics did not believe that Christ as a divine being could actually suffer. So this is the premise that the Basilides had to say that Jesus could not have been crucified.
Yeah.
Now, you cannot take away the premise, but still hold the belief. That's hypocrisy of the highest degree. If you're going to appeal that Basilides, did not believe so and so thing, then you must also grant that Christ was a divine being in their eyes, and henceforth, so and so, whatever. It's right here, before our eyes. It seemed, if he seemed to suffer, he was crucified after all. Then it was, in fact, all in appearance. And maybe next line, in next slide, we can have a look. Again, just corroborating, according to Basilides, since Christ was a divine being, he had all sorts of divine powers, and he used them when it came time for him to be crucified. What he did was pull an identity switch. He transformed Simon of Cyrene, who was carrying his cross, to make him look like Jesus. And um, he himself transformed Jesus into the appearance of Simon of Cyrene. And so, when they arrived at the place of crucifixion, the Romans crucified the wrong man, and Jesus stood beside the cross laughing. At this point, I just remember Bart Ehrman laughing, his cynical laugh, right?
Yeah, he's like, Simon probably didn't find it very funny.
Yeah. It's crazy, but the way she's saying that, these people did not believe the crucifixion. Well, they first believed in the divinity of Christ first, that he was so holy that he cannot be made to suffer.
The argument I present to them when they try and prove the Quranic interpretation of the crucifixion, give me the people who believed in the Quranic account, not the Gnostic account. This is the point. This is where the distinction has to be made. Because if you're giving me the Gnostic account doesn't fit the Quran. Okay, it fits a different theology, which is that, as you pointed out, Daniel, and as Bart Ehrman pointed out, Christ was divine to the degree he doesn't have a physical body. That doesn't work in Islam. Okay, that's a partner with Allah. So you have to provide, as Muslims, names of people who believed in the Quranic version, not any other version.
Yeah. Also here, I think it's line 5. They say that some said Christ did not have a real flesh and blood body. That's what defined the Gnostic belief. So do you believe that Christ did not have a flesh and blood body, and that he was so divine that there was no suffering that can be inflicted on him?
Yeah.
If you don't, then you cannot use it. And also Basilides is not an early group, and it's well known that there were heresies coming along, but the church fathers were calling them out, refuting them, and providing doctrinal correction as they appeared.
Yeah.
Anything more you want to add there, Adam, or can I just go to the next one?
I think we summed that one up.
Yeah. Let me share again the video.
Some atheists that believe in something called swoon theory. Swoon theory is essentially Jesus.
Swoon theory.
When you say what she's talking about are these very small subsect of scholars that have suggested hypothetically what could have happened or what may have happened. Okay, that's not the same as what is the established core belief within scholarship when it comes to the crucifixion. Like, for example, I just give an example, counter her example. Okay, there's scholars, credible scholars, who believe Jesus didn't exist and it's just a myth. That has just amount weight and credence as the swoon theory argument. These are hypotheses that very, very, as I said, these very, very specific scholars, again, isolated away from the general scholarship body, have tried to put forth as a hypothesis or idea of what may have happened. But their hypothesis has no weight within scholarship. It's been widely rejected. Swoon theory has been widely rejected. The Christ myth hypothesis has been widely rejected. So you can't be holding on to stuff like that. That's really, really silly, because if you're going to play that argument, I could talk about some of the scholars that have specific views on the origin of the Quran, and you're not going to like it.
Yeah, I mean, let me just get the presentation in the right way. Just a minute. Crucifixion of Christ. All right. So now that we have it there, so swoon theory is mostly, I have heard it from the Ahmadiyyas, the Qadiani sect.
It's not even biologically possible either, but anyway.
Yeah. So apparently, what if it was a swoon theory? How would Jesus look like? He would still be, submitted to the whipping at the post, a lot of bloodshed and, the tearing of the bone marrow tissue and all that. And then they come and they put him on the cross. He loses blood and all that. How would he look like if it was just a swoon theory? How can he walk out of that? How can he appear to people?
Oh.
I mean, he would be visibly, first of all, he could not walk because, he had nail holes in his legs. And apparently, if you believe the biblical narrative sites as well. But people would clearly see that, he was put to shame, he suffered, he's bleeding. And it would not inspire confidence. But appealing to swoon theory still requires a Muslim to acknowledge that he was indeed on the cross. But that goes against the standard framework of Islam, where tafsirs have said that he was not crucified, and they appeal to Gnostic heresies, said he was
Yeah.
switched by someone else.
Uh,
But yeah, what is the historian's view? We have at the bottom we have a quote from Mike Licona. He's a historian and New Testament scholar. He said, "Adherence to this view is as rare as a hen's teeth."
Yep. No. Same with the Christ myth hypothesis. Exactly the same thing.
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
use that as a good analogy to explain, why there's certain. Of course, people can hypothesize whatever they want, but reality is there's a specific dominant position within scholarship, and it's dominant for a reason. Okay.
Yeah.
In the context of Christ, the crucifixion is the widely attested to fact, undisputed
Mhm.
fact.
Yeah. So the scholars, the fringe loners that she's appealing to, this is what Bart Ehrman has to say to those kind of people. I don't know. Would you like to read it, Adam, or shall I read it?
I can, yeah, I'll give it. I'll read it out. Few of these mythicists are actually scholars trained in ancient history, religion, biblical studies, or any cognate field, let alone in the ancient languages generally thought to matter for those who want to say something with any degree of authority about a Jewish teacher who allegedly lived in first century Palestine. There are a couple of exceptions of the hundreds, thousands of mythicists, two, to my knowledge, actually have PhD credentials in relevant fields of study. But even taking these into account, there is not a single mythicist who teaches New Testament or early Christianity or even classics at any accredited institution of higher learning in the Western world. And it is no wonder why. These views are so extreme and so unconvincing to 99.99% of the real experts.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a smackdown he just laid on whoever Korra was appealing to.
And what
Apparently, they're not
the thing I like about Ehrman is that Ehrman gives you like what the consensus within scholarship is. Like this is what the consensus is. He's not saying this is like my opinion here, because he doesn't run off that. Within scholarship, generally the appeal is to what is the objective kind of standard within scholarship as far as what is the most commonly held position among scholars. And he'll actually give you like the most common one, the less likely one, and the least likely one. He breaks it down like that, which is quite nice. But he's very clear and concise in how he evaluates these different positions, and then tells you it's definitely not this one for all the above reasons mentioned.
Yeah, definitely. And we will also, I think, the occasion serves us, since she's talking about historians and scholars. Let's have a look at. So I have a list of prominent, highly credentialed historians today, both Christians as well as agnostics and atheists. Let's see what they have to say. The first one, Muslim's favorite. He says, Bart Ehrman says, who is an agnostic New Testament historian scholar, one of the most certain facts of history is that Jesus was crucified on the orders of the Roman prefect of Judea, Pontius Pilate.
Yeah.
One of the most certain facts. Then a German historian scholar who is also an atheist, Gerd Ludemann, he's also highly regarded in this field. He says, Jesus' death as a consequence of crucifixion is indisputable. You have two non-Christian historians who are highly regarded. They're telling us that, it is indisputable. It is one of the most certain facts of history.
Yeah.
And this is based on research, scholarly consensus. And another, Gary Habermas, the crucifixion, he's also a leading resurrection researcher, historian, New Testament scholar. He says the crucifixion of Christ is one of the most certain facts of history. It is accepted by virtually 100% of all scholars who have studied the subject. Just like Ehrman was pointing out in the past slide, he said he doesn't know anybody credentialed who does historical studies in the New Testament to deny that Christ was crucified.
There's also, I don't know if you mentioned him on the slides. I know you have another slide with a couple more on it. But there's also James P. Meyer as well.
I don't have him, I guess.
So James P. Meyer, he wrote a book called The Historical Jesus in Recent Research. And I just summarize basically on pages 126 to 128, he deals with the historical reliability of the crucifixion, and his conclusion is historical fact. So this is an additional scholar to throw in there.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, they are any person, who is an actual credible scholar, they would look at the facts, and they will come to the same conclusion. Like, for example, E.P. Sanders, again, he's a New Testament historian scholar. I mean, all the three quotes that we just now read, they are like very certain, right? They're answering directly to what Korra was saying, that that is ambiguity, dispute, and all that.
Yeah, and the other thing as well, Daniel, is just so people understand what Daniel's pulling up here. All these scholars that he's mentioning, alongside James P. Meyer, we're talking top, and James D.G. Dunn as well has also spoken about this. We're talking about the top scholars of the field, right? The top historians, the top New Testament scholars, okay, that have analyzed this as critically as you could possibly imagine with all the evidence in front of them. And they are conclusively saying, based on their findings from everything they have in front of them, this is a historical, undisputed fact. And these are all top, as I said, top scholars from top universities, top accredited universities. So,
Absolutely.
take what you will from that.
Yeah. So maybe you can take it away, this slide.
Yeah, so this is E.P. Saunders. Again, E.P. Saunders is also essentially an atheist, just to kind of explain to people what his position is. But anyway, I should be careful here because he hasn't fully addressed the nature of his position. But when he talks about it, he clearly frames himself as sort of like an agnostic atheist. But anyway, it's a separate issue.
Yeah.
I shall first offer a list of statements about Jesus that meet two standards. They are almost beyond dispute, and they belong to the framework of his life, and especially of his public career. A list of everything that we know about Jesus would be appreciably longer. Jesus was born the 4th year BC, near the time of the death of Herod the Great. He spent his childhood and early adult years in Nazareth, a Galilean village. He was baptized by John the Baptist. He called disciples. He taught in the towns, villages, and countrysides of Galilee, apparently not the cities. He preached the kingdom of God. About the year 30, he went to Jerusalem for Passover. He created a disturbance in the temple area. He had a final meal with the disciples. He was arrested and interrogated by Jewish authorities, specifically the high priest. He was executed on the orders of the Roman prefect Pontius Pilate. And this is from the historical figure Jesus, pages 10 to 11.
Yeah. So there you have it, Korra. You said there is a dispute. Historians are not disputing this fact. And any people that you're appealing to, they are not credible scholars within this field.
Yeah.
Then just to quickly...
And the other thing, I just want to quickly add this as well, just because I know you're going on to these ones, so just also to add in there, quoting Muslim scholars to reinforce a Muslim argument or a Muslim historical position is not a credible position because you have to be objective in the sources you're using. Objectively speaking, this is the conclusion even by non-Christians, okay? They've conclusively come to the same view. They don't have an agenda here. Like E.P. Sanders is not trying to prove Christianity and disprove Islam. He's just interested in one thing and one thing only, which is the historical facts. So for Korra, this is exactly what the challenge would be. You would have to then address the fact that all these historians who don't have a specific allegiance to one religion or the other are all based on the findings to the best of their understanding and to the best of the methodology they have in front of them, which is the best methodology available from a historical lens today, why they're all coming to the same conclusion, which is that it's an undisputed historical fact. You have to address that.
Yeah. So we have a few more quotes. I'll just quickly try to rush through it. Don't want to camp on it much here. So James Dunn, again, a prominent scholar, he also talks about the same thing, that there is almost a universal assent concerning Jesus's baptism by John and his death by crucifixion. Then Horbury, Davis, the same thing. So we have a lot of, then Mike Licona talks about the same thing. Given the strong evidence for Jesus's crucifixion without good evidence to the contrary, the historian must conclude that the process killed him. This is a conclusion shared by virtually all scholars who have studied the subject. So we don't have any evidence to the contrary. The only evidence the Muslims have is Quran interpretation, right? Taken from the tafsirs, not even directly from the Quran, because in the Quran it's ambiguous as far as I have read it.
Yeah.
So again,
I just want to point out, when I was speaking about E.P. Sanders earlier, I got the names confused. I was actually thinking of John Dominic Crossan, which is the Irish guy here. He's the guy who's he was, if I'm not mistaken, I think he was training Daniel to be a priest. He either became a priest or he was training to be a priest. And then when he began to question things, he kind of decided, okay, I'm not going to do that anymore. I'll just commit to scholarship. But as far as his like religious position is concerned, he doesn't actually have a specific position anymore because he's more kind of leaning on the agnostic end of things.
Okay, got it. Yeah, that's fine. So again, J.D. Crossan, agnostic, says Jesus' death by crucifixion under Pontius Pilate is as sure as anything historical can ever be. I mean, all these prominent scholars are so certain about this fact, this one fact, that Jesus was crucified.
Yep.
So yeah, I think we can leave it there. We don't have to camp on it much. There is no ambiguity among scholars and historians. They have seen the evidence and they believe the evidence.
Yeah.
Being put on the cross and not passing away, and then when he was taken off and so on and so forth, that reconciles the gospel accounts when people saw him again. So we see a multitude of disputes, not just within theists, but within...
See, again, she's making it seem a different narrative in the Bible, right? When people saw Jesus in the Bible, he had a different body. They were not able to recognize him. Something fundamentally had changed in his physical body. It appeared with doors closed and things like that. Somehow he was material, immaterial kind of, it's like, glorified body. So it's not the same appearance that he had once he was raised again.
Historical groups in the 1st and 2nd century, and we see church fathers acknowledging this as well. For example, we have Ignatius's congregation. We even have Paul in 1 Corinthians. We have a multitude of different study Bibles that say that Paul is addressing groups that denied the crucifixion in his time. So we see...
Okay, this is a big one. Again, I believe this is so wrong. I don't recall any account where Paul was addressing Christians who were denying the crucifixion. Do you know of any?
What verse did she say? 1 Corinthians, is it?
Yeah, 1 Corinthians would be about the resurrection. So as far as I know, Paul was dealing with issues about resurrection, people either not believing or people believing it is past, but never about actual doubts about the crucifixion, whether it actually happened or not.
Yeah, I'm just checking here, see if there's anything. I've heard this argument before, but I mean, if he's addressing anyone in that context, in that way, it would have been the Gnostics. Because Gnosticism began quite early on anyway, but I'm just trying to see where exactly, like, she didn't even provide a verse. I hate when they do that as well. They just provide a statement, but there's no verse to accompany the statement that they're talking about.
Yeah.
Let's see. She said crucifixion. I'm just going to try and see if I can find something on the crucifixion.
I can put it on the screen probably. Let's see.
Yeah. Maybe it's here. Maybe it's 1 Corinthians chapter 1. Could be this one.
Yeah, so I have it on the screen. I'll just start reading probably. Let's see. Even when you look at the headings here, the first heading is the resurrection of Christ, the resurrection of the dead, the resurrection body, mystery, and victory. So there is no incidents here, as far as I have seen, that even talks about the crucifixion. But I'll just read through. You can let me know.
Yeah.
It says, "Now I would remind you, brothers, of the gospel I preached to you, which you received, in which you stand, by which you are being saved, if you hold fast to the word I preached to you, unless you believed in vain. For I delivered to you as of first importance what I also received, that Christ died for our sins in accordance with the scriptures, that he was buried and he was raised on the 3rd day in accordance with the scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas, then to the 12. Then he appeared to more than 500 brothers at one time, most of whom are still alive, though some have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James and to all the apostles. Last of all, as to one untimely born, he also appeared to me. For I am the least of the apostles, unworthy to be called an apostle, because I persecuted the church of God. But by the grace of God, I am what I am, and his grace toward me was not vain. On the contrary, I worked harder than any of them, though it was not I, but the grace of God that is with me. Whether then I, when it was I or they, so we preached, and so you believed. Now, if Christ is proclaimed as raised from the dead, how can some of you say that there is no resurrection of the dead? But if there is no resurrection of the dead, then not even Christ has been raised. And if Christ has not been raised, then our preaching is in vain and your faith is in vain. We are even found to be misrepresenting God because we testified about God that he raised Christ, whom he did not raise, if it is not true that the dead are not raised. For if the dead are not raised, not even Christ has been raised. And if Christ has not been raised, your faith is futile and you are still in your sins. Then those also who have fallen asleep in Christ have perished. If in Christ we have hope in this life only, we are of all the people most to be pitied. But in fact, Christ has been raised from the dead, the first fruits of those who have fallen asleep. For as by a man came death, by a man also has come the resurrection of the dead. For as in Adam all die, so also in Christ all shall be made alive. But each in his own order, Christ the first fruits, then it is coming, those who belong to Christ. Then comes the end, when he delivers the kingdom to God the Father after destroying every rule and authority and power, for he must reign until he has put all his enemies under his feet, and the last enemy to be destroyed is death. So, yeah, there is no, as far as I know, there is no crucifixion defense in this thing. There is a resurrection defense for sure.
Yeah.
So maybe she's confused about this again. Paul never, had to convince people that Christ died. The issue was that he was raised.
Yeah.
Like people were not able to believe that. But,
Yeah, I was looking as well. I don't think I can find anything either. And as I pointed out, Daniel, the Gnosticism thing began pretty early on. So even if there is a verse where he's addressing some specific renegade group, then my conclusion would be then he'd be addressing Gnostics. I mean, that would be my conclusion because we know they existed. But again, he's not. You see, here's the thing, right? You cannot conclusively say, even if such a verse exists, okay?
Mm-hmm.
This would be my thing to Korra. You'd have to prove that those people Paul is addressing are Muslims.
Right, yeah.
That would be your challenge then, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Because as I said, historically speaking, the only people within scholarship that it's accepted that denied the crucifixion of Christ are the Gnostics. So you'd have to prove that it's something other than Gnostics that believed in that, as in the Muslims of the Quran, right? Who held to the Quranic narrative. Again, you're still caught in the same circle. I don't think the verse exists, but even if it does, you still have to prove the Quranic interpretation over the other interpretations.
Yeah, so it will be the Basilides, Basilides are Gnostics. All right, so let me continue.
Bibles that say that Paul is addressing groups that denied the crucifixion in his time. So we see early dispute. This isn't a 600-year later development. This is something that was always going on in the first century. But I wanted to ask, because you said that this is a well-established historical event, right?
Right.
Can you give me an example of a source that establishes this without a shadow of a doubt?
Well, we definitely have the Gospels, which are eyewitness accounts, and we also have Jewish historians, we have Roman historians, we have other extra biblical accounts of this.
Okay, perfect. So let's start with the Gospels, because obviously that's going to be your foundation as Christians. So you say that the Gospels were authored by eyewitnesses. Do you have any evidence for that?
Yeah.
It's not. You see that again. This is the kind of the insincerity of the argument. Of course, that would be your source as Christians. It's not just Christians that use the Bible as a legitimate source to determine the truth here. Mm-hmm. Atheists are using it as well, because for them it actually has historical value. It's not just about a spiritual intrinsic belief here. It goes beyond that. There's an objective standard by which it's recognized. Okay, this is an ancient text from the first century, whereby we can get a good understanding as to what may have happened here. Right. The other reason as to why it's so definitive is it's supported not just within the Bible but outside of the Bible, which are the extra biblical sources which they're going to mention now, like the one by Josephus, right? The what's it called, Flavium Testimonium thing that he wrote, or the Antiquity of the Jews thing that he wrote.
Yeah.
You also have a source by Tacitus as well, which talks about exactly the same thing. Now, here's the thing: if all these sources from the first century, when speaking about Christ, determine that he was certainly he certainly existed and he certainly was crucified, then you have a big dilemma or problem as a Muslim, because where are you going to find the Islamic interpretation outside of that? One
Yeah.
other thing I just want to add as well. I just saw here, I was just checking quickly one of the things, and it said that the thing that Paul was debating, this is from the crucifixion standpoint, was not that the crucifixion didn't happen, right? Or was that groups didn't believe that. This is one of the things that was pointed out, which I think is quite good. It's he was debating with the Jews that whether the Messiah had to be crucified. That's what he was debating with them. That's a different argument. That's not him saying Christ wasn't crucified, or that these groups believe that Christ wasn't crucified. He's addressing the belief that certain Jewish groups had that the Messiah wouldn't be crucified, therefore Christ can't be the Messiah. That was their argument that they were putting against him, and that's what he was addressing. But that's not him saying that the crucifixion didn't happen, or these groups believe the crucifixion didn't happen. And as I argued before, even if there were groups, they're not. You'd have to prove they're Muslims, and that's a tall order. But anyway.
Yeah, so that's the thing. She's asking for eyewitness testimonies and things like that. It doesn't believe that New Testament has eyewitness, information. So that's where we will disconnect from the video and just try to examine ourselves and see, what comes out. On a very surface level, we need to understand that nobody would invent such a Messiah. Just like you said just now, Messiah is supposed to be a king, prince, ruler who reigns over all the earth from Jerusalem. That's the one that they were looking for. And according to the, one of the criteria that historians use, the criteria of embarrassment. Again, Arman, Muslim's favorite poster boy, he said, you wouldn't make up a Messiah like Jesus. The Messiah was supposed to overthrow the enemies. And so if you're going to make up a Messiah, you'd make up a powerful Messiah. You wouldn't make up somebody who was humiliated, tortured, and killed by his enemies.
Yeah.
And he adds in Jesus' Apocalyptic Prophet of the New Millennium, page 93, Christians who wanted to proclaim Jesus as Messiah would not have invented the notion that he was crucified, because his crucifixion created such a scandal. Indeed, the Apostle Paul calls it the chief stumbling block for Jews.
Yeah.
So where did the tradition come from? It must have actually happened.
Yeah. And then the other thing as well is it was after the crucifixion. Again, this is a separate argument because I know we're focusing on the crucifixion here. But from a historical standpoint, it's shortly after the crucifixion, the same people who were a witness to that and then see him miraculously risen from the dead.
Yeah.
Okay. And then you have an explosion out from that into what ends up being, Christianity, right? The religion develops into what it becomes much, much later. Just at that, and I would say, and as Ehrman argues, that's at the moment of the crucifixion, or at the moment of the resurrection, rather. But anyway, that's a separate point. We can probably address that later.
Yeah. So right here, I want to introduce, J. Warner Wallace. He's a very public figure. He's a prominent American cold case homicide detective. And later on, he became a Christian apologist as well. But he did not start that way. He applied his investigative expertise to the Gospels at the age of 35, concluding that Christianity is historically and evidentially true. So we will just try to understand today his methodology, because as a cold case detective, like Adam, when we say cold case, what comes to mind?
This is like oh my gosh, I'm trying to think. A cold case is a case where you don't have a lot to go off, essentially. I'm guessing here. I don't know the terminology.
No worries, yeah.
But if it's a cold case, I'm assuming it just means there's you're kind of going into it blind, or basically because there's not a lot of information, and you have to do all the research to try and find whatever the truth is.
Not exactly, but it means that it happened maybe years ago, decades ago. It happened sometime in the past, and it is closed, or at least shelved. But now you pick it up, so you don't have the fresh testimony, fresh evidence, nothing. Everything is in the books, witness statements and all those things. So that's the kind of cases he worked on. And he is trained by the, I believe it is the California Police Department. He is specifically trained as a detective in forensic statement analysis, meaning he's going to look into the statements and then come to the conclusion whether these people were eyewitnesses or not. So he has 25-year, experience in such kind of scenarios, and the cases that he solved, the methodology he applied, that is the exact methodology he said he applied to the Gospels to test when somebody, shared the Gospel with him. He wanted to test and see whether these are actually eyewitness accounts or not. And apparently, these are the four principles he relies on to acknowledge, test something. For evaluating the eyewitness reliability. First thing he would like to check is, were the eyewitnesses actually present? So dating, opportunity, were they present on the scene? Are the eyewitnesses witnesses corroborated, whether there is internal and external support or not? Are the witnesses accurate and consistent over time? Like, for forensic statement analysis and chain of custody, what happened to the evidence? Do the witnesses lack motive to lie? Because if
that was the one I was thinking of, because the last one, I was wondering if that was going to come up, because I remember, I don't know who it was. It might have been Ehrman that said it, but it was a really good point, which is that when you talk about the witness of a man versus the witness of a woman, at that time, from a historical standpoint, within their context, the witness of a man was given greater, it had greater weight to it. And in the biblical accounts, it's the women that find Christ and are testifying of Christ, which is like, if you're going to lie, you would say in the moment that, the disciples, maybe John and Peter, were the first ones to encounter the risen Christ and then pass the message on. But no, the focus is on the women who first encounter him, and then they testify to what they've seen, which is very unorthodox, which kind of further supports the argument. It was a good point that Ehrman, I think it was Ehrman, made it.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. So again, that would again be classified under the criteria of embarrassment. Like you wouldn't choose it, but that's how it happened.
Yeah.
All right. So very quickly, we will just check this. This is from God's Not Dead 2, where this person J. Warner Wallace is called, and he gives some evidence regarding the historicity of Jesus and his crucifixion, and the eyewitness accounts, actually eyewitness narratives.
I can't hear anything, Daniel. Oh, the volume, yeah.
That was muted, yeah. By the way, is the volume low again?
I can hear, but it's very low.
Okay, yeah, this is the problem with the Microsoft Edge. Let me switch to Chrome.
It's strange. You think because it's just a browser, they'd work the same, right?
Yeah, technically they should, but I'm not sure what is the problem there. Okay, let's listen to it.
Yeah, way better.
My name is James Warner Wallace. I'm a retired homicide detective from Los Angeles County.
And are you the author of the book, Cold Case Christianity?
Yes, I am.
Can you share the subtitle of the book with the court, please?
A homicide detective investigates the claims of the Gospels.
Would I be correct in saying that your duties as a homicide detective include investigating cold case homicides?
Yes, that is and was my expertise.
Don't most of those cases get solved with DNA?
Leading, and counsel is testifying again, Your Honor.
I'll rephrase. How many of your cold cases were solved through the use of DNA evidence?
None, not one. That's often popular on TV, but our department's never had the good fortune of solving a cold case with DNA.
Well, how do most of these cases get solved?
Often by examining eyewitness claims, witness claims that were made many years earlier, even though often our witnesses are now deceased.
Forgive my ignorance, Mr. Wallace, but how is that possible?
Well, we have a number of techniques that we can use to test the reliability of an eyewitness, including something called forensic statement analysis. That's a discipline where we scrutinize the statements of eyewitnesses and looking at what they choose to minimize, what they choose to emphasize, what they omit altogether, how they expand time or contract time. And when we examine these kinds of eyewitness accounts, we can usually tell who's lying and who's telling the truth and even who the guilty party is.
And did you apply this skill set anytime outside of your official capacity?
Yes, I applied my expertise to the death of Jesus at the hands of the Romans. And I actually looked at the Gospels as I would any other set of forensic statements. Within a matter of months, I determined that the four Gospels, written from different perspectives, contained the eyewitness accounts about the life, ministry, death, and resurrection of Jesus.
And did you consider that the four accounts might be part of a conspiracy designed to promote belief in a fledgling faith?
Yeah, you have to consider conspiracies when assessing eyewitness accounts. But successful conspiracies typically involve the fewest number of people. It's a lot easier for 2 people to lie and keep a secret than it is for 20. And that's really the problem with the conspiracy theories related to the apostles in the first century. There are just far too many of them trying to hold this conspiracy for far too long a period of time. And far worse, they're experiencing pressure like no other, unimaginable pressure. Every one of these folks was tortured and died what they claimed to see, and none of them ever recanted their story. So the idea that this is a conspiracy in the first century is just really unreasonable. Instead, what I see in the Gospels is something I call unintended eyewitness support statements.
What's an unintended eyewitness support statement?
If I can borrow your Bible. Let me go to the Gospel of Matthew for an example of this. I'll start with a passage in which Jesus is in front of Caiaphas at a
Oh yeah, pause it. I just want to.
Fit in his face.
This reminds me of something. There's a passage in that statement. I think it's in Matthew 26. I think that's the one he's on, right? I brought this up the other time actually.
Okay.
I don't know if he addresses it here, but basically, there's a very subtle statement that's made as part of the trial of Christ, which is that some of the people who bring accusations against you are saying something about you destroying this temple and then raising it back up in 3 days, which obviously is a reference to allegedly the crucifixion and then resurrection of Christ, right? And it's a claim that they're bringing against him that he said, and they're accusing him of that as part of the trial. But then again, John then in John's gospel explains what the implication of that was, going back to the actual historical account where it happened versus how it was leveled against him during the trial, which is very interesting. But anyway, that's a separate thing. There was one other thing I wanted to mention as well. So for those who don't know as well, I'm not an expert when it comes to court cases or any of this. I don't major in this, so I'm very basic. I'm pretty much a neophyte when it comes to this. But there is something called circumstantial evidence as well, which is when all the facts of the circumstance come together, what kind of a picture does it paint overall? Because in some cases, when they're solving crimes, you may not have a direct kind of, what's the word for it? You may not have like when someone commits a murder, they might not have like direct video footage of it. They might not have a direct statement of the killer saying they killed the person. But when they start lining up all the little bits of evidence together, it then actually paints an overall picture that points to one specific thing. And then that's how in those cases they will, even if the murderer doesn't come out and say that they murdered the person, they can then come to a common agreement in court that this person should be put behind bars based on all the evidence that we have, regardless of their testimony, the testimony they're holding to, which is that they didn't do it. But anyway, that's a side thing. Anyway, sorry, Daniel.
Yeah, no worries. So let's continue.
And struck him with their fists. Others slapped him and said, "Prophesy to us, Christ, who hit you?" Now, that seems like a very simple request, given that the people who hit him are standing right in front of him. This makes no sense. Why would it be prophecy to be able to tell you who hit you? But it's not until you read Luke that you get an answer to this. He says, the men who were guarding Jesus began mocking and beating him. They blindfolded him and demanded, "Prophesy, who hit you?" So now we know why this was a challenge, because Luke tells us the thing that Matthew left out, that he was actually blindfolded at the time this took place. This is very common, this kind of unintentional eyewitness support that fills in a detail that the first witness left out. After years of scrutinizing
that's good.
using the template that we use to determine if an eyewitness is reliable, I concluded that the 4 Gospels in this book contain the reliable accounts of the actual words of Jesus.
And that's to include the statements quoted by Miss Wesley in her class.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Detective. Your witness.
Detective Wallace, I'm not going to try to match biblical knowledge with you. But isn't it true that these gospel accounts vary widely in what they say? That there are numerous discrepancies between these accounts?
Absolutely. But that's exactly what we should expect.
I don't quite understand that.
Well, reliable eyewitness accounts always differ slightly in the way they recall the story. They're coming to it from different geographic perspectives, their history, even where they are located in their room. When I examined the Gospels, I was trying to determine if these were accurate, reliable accounts in spite of any differences that might be between the accounts.
And as a devout Christian, you feel you succeeded?
Mr. Kane, I think you misunderstand me. When I began this study, I was a devout atheist. I began examining the Gospels as a committed skeptic, not as a believer. You see, I wasn't raised in a Christian environment, although I do think I have an unusually high regard for the value of evidence. I'm not a Christian because I was raised that way or because I hoped it would satisfy some need or accomplish some goal. I'm simply a Christian because it's evidentially true.
Amen.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the last thing that he said, unintentional corroboration, that's a very strong thing. It's very, that is something that we can't actually make up. And this is what the cops actually see play out in many, many cases. One of the witness slips and he gives out information that the other, the other person might be withholding, or he may not be actually aware of it. Like, for example, if I was standing like this and I am trying to rob a bank or something, and I pulled out a knife, and if you're on this side of me, you will only see a knife, and your report would be, oh, the guy had a knife and he was trying to rob at knife point. But there could be another person here and he sees a different angle. I also have a gun, right on my belt. On my left side I have a gun. So your testimony would be, I have a knife. The other person would be knife and a gun. So it depends on where you're looking from, and what did you observe. So that's what he's talking about. And you will find this throughout the Gospels. I mean, 4 Gospels. When we look at the harmony of the Gospels, we put them side by side, it gives great information. Explains so many different variations, like even the Judas's falling down in different accounts. So all that can be looked at from the perspective that this cold case detective is talking about, and that will make sense, because then you will know, okay, this actually happened, and these people did not try to collude, make a consistent story, but they reported what they saw accurately and faithfully.
Yeah.
So as per Korra's question, are these eyewitness accounts? If you look at the Gospels themselves, all right. So if you look at the Gospels themselves, they mention the fact that they are giving us the eyewitness accounts. Luke was very, very meticulous, right? For example, if you look at this, the opening of Luke, he clearly tells us that, he has undertaken to draw up an account of the things that have been fulfilled among us, just as they were handed down to us by those who from the first were eyewitnesses.
Yeah. And if I'm not mistaken as well, I think I have to double check this, but if I'm not mistaken, I think even within scholarship, it's agreed that the author of Luke and Acts was with Paul, right? That he was there alongside Paul.
Yes, in the book of Acts, it mentions that I and Paul are together. We are traveling.
So like you have a guy who's there at the time, as early as the time of Paul, right? Relaying all these events that happened. And then obviously in the Gospel of Luke, he's in conversation with all the people that saw it, all the eyewitnesses, and then he's putting together the most accurate. So what he would have been doing is he would have been playing the role of investigator, because if I'm not mistaken, Luke was a doctor, right?
Yeah, they call him physician. Yeah,
or physician. My apologies. But he's going around and he's making sure that they all line up. That these, like, he's making sure he has the most accurate details he can put together as part of this gospel. He's not just taking bits from here and bits from there and just hoping they stick. He's being quite rigorous in his testing, which is really cool. But anyway.
Yeah. So just because Luke is recording the eyewitness testimony, it does not mean it is not. It doesn't matter who records it. Like this detective is going to go and take a testimony witness, it is still called an eyewitness testimony when it is presented in court. So Luke is merely recording the eyewitness testimony of the people who were there, who saw, and who testified. The other person, direct disciple, would be the Apostle John. In the Gospel of John, very clearly he testifies about himself, like John 21:24. This is the disciple who testifies. And he says, to these things, who wrote them down, we know his testimony is true. So the beloved disciple, we can find multiple references. If you look at the last one, 19:26, 21:20. This person is mentioned, beloved disciple. And then the last 26 verses, Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, and he said to his mother, "Woman, behold your son." So apparently, John was there together with Mary, and he witnessed the crucifixion of Christ, or at least Christ being on the cross. 1934 corroborates that. It says, "But one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and at once there came out blood and water."
And
And
the other thing,
1930.
the medical thing about blood and water,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
that's a medically attested to thing today.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's what happens at the moment of death. If you pierce someone, blood and water will come out, blood and fluid.
Yeah. So 1935 then says, "The man who saw it has given his testimony, and his testimony is true. He knows that he tells the truth." So, I mean, how direct can you be, Adam? The text is telling us we are the eyewitnesses. We have seen and we testify. Then there is one man who is clearly declaring he's not the eyewitness, but is recording the testimony of the eyewitness.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So some of the common objections, on this first topic, whether the witnesses were present, people say that the Gospels might be late because they have anonymous authors. What would
Yep.
be your response to that, Adam?
Well, my argument, and I like to go with D.A. Carson's position on this. He writes about this in his critical commentary on John. He has an introduction in that where he addresses this this issue of anonymity. My question would always be, what's the external evidence that tells you that these Gospels were written by anonymous authors versus being written by the authors they claim to be written by? I think that's an important question, because if you're going to state that, you then have to provide external evidence. You can't just hypothesize and say, yeah, that's probably the best explanation I can come up with. But based on what evidence? Because historically speaking, within the church, what is the view on these Gospels? The view of these Gospels is that they were written by the followers of Jesus, right? That the disciples of Jesus put together these Gospels for people to read and for people to understand the message of Christ, okay? And all of that. But if you're going to sit there and reject what the earliest witnesses to the traditions, to the customs, to the understanding that they had of these Gospels are saying, that's really strange. Like, I'll put it to you like this, Daniel. I would obviously take 100 times over the testimonies of the 2nd century followers of Jesus who are claiming, yeah, these are authentic and they're written by the disciples, versus scholars who come 1,700-800 years later, right?
Yeah.
These people were there, these people were there, and they're all consistently saying the same thing, which is that these Gospels are authentic.
Exactly.
They're written by the authors they claim to be written by. And then you come along, some scholars come along 1,700-800 years later now saying, well, no, we don't think that. We hypothetically think it's, even though we don't have external evidence, that it's, whatever, it's, anonymous authors. Again, I'm sorry, if I'm looking at evidence, I'm going to go with what consistently the church has thought and believed about this, and what has been attested to within church history and tradition, versus what people who came 1,700-800 years after the fact are saying.
Yeah. Also, to add to that, it was a common practice back in antiquity that they did not actually put their signature on the document because, people knew it was a close-knit community and people knew by association who's writing this thing. And accepting the point that Adam said, there has never been debate about who wrote what. The church history has always accepted, Luke wrote Luke, Mark wrote Mark, and, all the 4 Gospels have been clearly accepted, whatever the traditional authorship has been. Again, the special pleading case would be here. Like, there are other documents like Tacitus, who was a Roman senator, a historian who lived
Daniel,
around,
I just want to add something just before you go there, something really interesting.
Mhm.
The Gnostic, the apocryphal Gospels, right, which were written by non-apostles, or people claiming to be apostles writing these texts, in the 2nd, 3rd century, they're called out by church leaders for writing false apostles, or writing false Gospels under a false name. So, for example, one example is when Irenaeus addresses this Gospel of Barnabas. He says, Barnabas never wrote a Gospel. This is nonsense. This is some group that has come up with this thing. But again,
Yeah.
you don't see that testimony then when it comes to the canon, the canonized text. It's accepted.
Exactly.
These are by who they claim to be. But then when something comes along that they know was not by one of the apostles, they address it in the 2nd century and the 3rd century.
Yeah.
So you would expect that if these gospels were not authentic, why don't they come out and say, no, these authors were anonymous, they're not the disciples, they didn't write that way. Yet all you have to go off now is, again, scholars who come 1,800 years after the fact. No, I'm going to go with the testimony of the people that were there.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, so that is a feature, it's not a bug, is what we need to understand, that it was a common practice. They did not need to put a signature, put their name on a particular document. As you can see from Tacitus as well, he wrote an entire history of the Roman Empire about the reign of Augustus Caesar to Nero, titled Annals, but his name was not on it, yet people know it. So how did they know? The question we need to understand is, how did they know who was the author of the Annals? Because it was attributed to him, an external attribution. So internally we have seen a few things. We can also now have a look at the external, or actually we can examine a few things. Adam, is this very small, or is it all
No,
right?
it's good. It's good.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, so like, for example, the lives of the 12 Caesars written by Suetonius. How do we know it is Suetonius? His signature is not there apparently, and it's a biography. Like, if we call the Gospels the biography of Jesus, it's kind of similar. So they know it through external attestation. People knew it. It says the through the dedication, external references by Pliny the Younger, and consistent manuscript title tradition. So that's something we need to note. Uh, we also have manuscript title tradition, which has been handed down by people who knew who wrote these things. Like Adam said, there is a continuation of understanding and acceptance of the authorship of this gospel. So the church has never doubted it. They're never in the blank. It's only people who came up later that started questioning it.
Yeah.
Parallel lives, again, it's a biography of, but again, we don't know, it was not signed, yet people know that Plutarch wrote it. Then Anabis of Alexander, written by Arian, again, external attestation. Life of Aesop is, again, it's a very famous thing. There are a lot, Epic of Gilgamesh, but just to give you an example, look at the dating there, right about the same time, except the last one. But no authorship directly on it, but yet people knew who wrote them. I think Homer's Iliad is also in the same thing, if I'm not wrong,
And I
regarding the
also
authorship.
think, as a separate kind of a very small side tangent,
Mhm.
there's a book called, it's a medieval text called Beowulf. And it was found, if I'm not mistaken, I think the manuscript that was found that contained, or whatever the parchment was that contains this epic poem on it, it's from the medieval period. So there's hypothesis as to when it may have emerged, but they're thinking maybe around the 7th or 8th century AD. And that doesn't have an author on it.
Yeah.
So this was a common practice back then. Okay, you're relying upon, okay, what's the consistent view that these people held to of these specific texts? So, like as Daniel pointed out, if you're willing to accept that Tacitus wrote Annals based on external testimony, why aren't you willing to accept that these Gospels were written by their authors based on the external testimony of the time, which is, as we said, there's just such an abundance of it there. No one's questioning it. But yet you want to question it today, but you don't want to question these other sources.
Right. Special pleading, that is.
Yeah.
Okay. So now talking about the life of Paul himself, because Paul is one of the major pillars of the New Testament. He's written about 2/3 of the New Testament in various letters to the churches. So look at how he came into the picture here. So apparently Jesus crucified 33 AD, 30 to 33, anytime around there. And according to the historical record, Paul got converted within the first 2 years of the crucifixion of Christ Jesus.
Yeah.
He claims a resurrection appearance, meaning he was one of the witnesses of his resurrection. He may not have been directly for the crucifixion, but he has seen the risen Lord Jesus. He encountered him. He spoke to him. He got directions from Jesus to go into a city, specific city, and wait there. And then Jesus speaks to Ananias, the disciple, and tells him that Paul has been shown what must be done and then he receives the Holy Spirit and he receives his sight, and the rest is history. But Jesus appears to Paul, Acts 9, 34, 35. Then Paul reports that he met James and Peter. So who are these people and why are they important, Adam?
Well, like if you're familiar with the biblical context, I mean, you're talking about people, people who were there with Jesus as part of his ministry, who experienced his entire life, that walked with him, right?
Mhm.
And this is the same argument I keep presenting to people, right? Paul was there, okay, based on what we know historically, and this is accepted, by the way. Even Ehrman points this out when he talks
Mhm.
about Paul. Paul was in contact with the direct disciples of Jesus.
Absolutely.
Okay, so he wasn't just making it up. Like Ehrman points that out, because some Muslims like to go along with this idea of Paulianity, which is that Paul created Christianity, right? And they try and pin it on him. But as Ehrman points out, that wasn't the case, because if he made it up, then why was he persecuting the religion he made up? It doesn't make sense, right?
Yeah.
He was persecuting them for a reason, right? Because they believed differently from what he believed, okay? Then he has the conversion, as Daniel pointed out, and then he's in direct contact with the disciples, right? He's giving you a basis, a context of how he came to know Christ, how he came to understand the gospel, not just through his experience with Christ, but then also his experience with the direct disciples. I mean, that's as good as a source you're going to get. Someone who's literally there with the direct disciples himself, commenting on them, what they taught, what they believed, the community, all of that. That's a really, really good, reliable source. I mean, it doesn't get much better than that.
Absolutely. And again, this is within the first 3 to 4 years since the crucifixion of Christ, meeting the eyewitnesses, the people who walked with Jesus, and then to whom Jesus appeared. In the midst of these people, Jesus appeared to them in closed room, and he ate with them. He ate with them fish, and he stayed with them 40 days, apparently giving them instruction, presenting infallible proofs of his being alive. So these people knew firsthand, the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Then moving on, AD 48, 50, which is Galatians 2, he had a second meeting with, then Peter, Paul, James, and John. So the three big pillars of the Jerusalem church, Peter, James, and John, and then Paul. We know the incident where, it was an issue of eating with the Gentiles and not eating with the Gentiles. Then Paul speaks and declares to them that, according to the new creation reality, things have changed. But the point here is, these are the big pillars in the Jerusalem church. James here is the half brother of Jesus Christ. Again, that would be a testimony in itself, right? Because they never followed Jesus while he was alive. We have records saying that he's a madman. He's gone to the extreme end. But now you see the same people, that same man, his half brother, coming to faith in Christ. And if you read the epistle of James, he calls him Lord, he calls him God.
Yeah.
So they discuss something. So Paul knew firsthand the accounts that these people would know from Jesus.
Yep.
And then Paul writes his first letter to Corinth. Paul preaches the gospel to Corinth around 51. Then Paul writes the letter according to historical records around AD 55. So this is the entire lifespan. If you look at it, it's within the first 20 to 25 years since the crucifixion of Christ Jesus.
Yeah.
So why is it important? We will know as we go to the next slide. Before I go, do you want to add anything on this timeline, Adam?
No, to me, this makes perfect sense. Very straightforward.
Okay. Yeah. So let's see then. Luke writes his gospel according to the internal attestation in church history around 50 to 53. How do we know this? Because on the previous screen we saw AD 55, Paul writes a letter to Corinthians, and in the letter to Corinthians he quotes Luke. So Luke has to be any time before whenever Paul wrote his letter. So that puts a timeline of 50 AD and before. Then Paul writes Acts. Again, we can place it anytime between 57 to 60 because both Peter and Paul were martyred between 61 and 65. And then you have the siege of Jerusalem, then the temple is destroyed. So this is the early attestation of these people's life events and, what records or what scriptures or what letters or documents they produced. If it is true that Paul quoted Luke, And according to a common understanding, Luke was taking from Matthew and Mark. It puts Matthew and Mark much earlier, probably, we don't know, 40 or something. Do you want to comment more on this, Adam?
Yeah, I like the other things. Well, this is one other thing that people kind of overlook a little bit, especially scholarship today. Like the ordering of the Gospels. Like, I don't know if you know, Daniel, but within scholarship, the view is that Mark's the first Gospel. But historically speaking, within the church, that's not true. It's not the case. The ordering of the Gospels, as found in the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, is based on when they were written. So it's believed that Matthew was written first, then Mark, then Luke, then John. Okay,
Makes
like
sense.
that was the church position on that. And again, today they're trying to go against that. Yeah, I would say Matthew's Gospel was first, Luke's was second, Mark's was third, and Matthew first, Mark second, Luke third, and then John fourth. But as far as these Gospels are concerned, the only reason they disregard these early dates, Daniel, is because they don't believe in prophecy. So, for example, because they have prophecies about the destruction of the temple, this is the basis for disregarding their earlier dating. Is that if we say that these Gospels are prophetic, then we're claiming that they're true, okay, and that they do contain the truth. And if we do that, then we're no longer atheists, okay? Then we have to go along with what they say. So from a scholarship standpoint, you have to come up with a means to work around that. So what's the idea? The idea is that the event already happened. They knew it already happened. And then they inserted the words into Christ prophetically saying it to obviously add weight to their argument. But I don't think that that's the right approach. I think the true approach here is, yes, they're earlier. The reason they can record these prophetic events is because Christ truly was able to do that as the Son of God. Okay, he was able to prophesy in that way. Okay,
Exactly.
and that's why it means that yes, they can predate the 70 AD. Anyway, that would be my position. But scholarship has kind of some strange positions on some of this stuff.
Yeah, that makes sense. So why did the timeline we saw earlier make sense? Because Paul is saying something, in his letters, in the First Corinthian letter. Look at this. It says, in the following instructions, I do not commend you, because when you come together, I'll just skip that. For I received from the Lord what I also delivered to you. So when did Paul receive it? Before he wrote the First Corinthians, right? Again, it puts the timeline back closer to the event when it actually happened. And there are other things also Paul talks about, that those traditions were delivered to him and those he is delivering to the church. Meaning, how did he receive them? It has to be from one of the eyewitnesses, like Peter, James, John, that he met, and the fellowship that he had with the church. Those are the traditions he's actually passing them down. For now, I know only this. Do you remember where is the other one, Adam, where he talks about I delivered the traditions that I also received?
I'm gonna have a quick look and see. You want to know where else he quotes the Gospels? Is it?
No, basically, does he talk about traditions that he received from the apostles, which he's also passing down to people?
Hold on, let me see.
Yeah, this one, according to Paul, he received from the Lord, which I also delivered unto you.
Yeah, I said one like hold fast to the whatever.
It's right here. It's right here, actually. 15:3. For I delivered to you as of first importance what I also received. So where did he receive this? Yeah, it has to be from the eyewitnesses, the apostle, Peter, Paul, James, those people. And not only this, Adam, if we look at the, again, stoning of Stephen, he heard the gospel there because Stephen preached the gospel there. Look at this. As they were stoning Stephen, he called out, 58, they cast him out of the city and stoned him. And the witnesses laid down their garments at the feet of a young man named Saul. This is the Paul. So he knew, he heard, he knew. And then he also got confirmations from the people who walked with Jesus Christ, the apostles, Peter, James, and John. So whatever Paul is delivering is not just haphazard. He's not just dreaming it, but it has a solid basis. It has a backing. It has, from the eyewitnesses. So, Korra, according to your question, these are the eyewitness accounts.
Yeah. Yeah.
Again, the other testimony, Adam, if you will look at it, even in their death, they have given us some evidence for Christianity.
Yeah.
If you look at within the biblical records, two people are mentioned. First is Stephen. We just read about him. It begs the question, where did they die? Okay, in Jerusalem. Stephen died in Jerusalem. Why did he die? If we inquire along these lines, then we will get our answers. He was stoned to death for what crime? What crime did Stephen do?
Yeah.
He was professing faith in Christ, right? And within the book of Acts, that's Acts chapter 7 for Stephen, Acts chapter 12 for James, son of Zebedee, again beheaded in Jerusalem. He also died in Jerusalem, apparently the city that kills the prophets of God. Why did he die? Again, you have an evidence that these are eyewitness testimonies, historical records that these people died there. And then James the Just, which is the brother of Jesus Christ, he died in Jerusalem too. So within 62 AD, you have these people dying and giving their testimony for something that they saw, something that they knew to be truth. Like we heard the detective, talking about, if it was a lie, none of them broke the chain, none of them broke down. And it is impossible to continue believing a lie, propagating a lie on such a big scale. The first preaching Peter did was 3,000 people got saved. And none of them recanted. None of them said, okay, it is a lie or it's not true.
One thing I want to point out, I don't know if you saw this. This is kind of funny. Someone mentioned this to Yemeni, right? It's a very recent video that he did. I think maybe it was his most recent video, actually. But basically, he argued, well, many Muslims died for their belief, right? Does that not make Islam true by the same logic? And the answer to that question is no. And the reason, I'll explain why, in case Yemeni's watching, because this is how the lady should have responded to that. She didn't, sadly. She kind of got a bit caught off guard.
Okay.
When the Christian followers, the earliest followers of Jesus, were subjugated to this kind of what would you call it? This kind of persecution. It was to the point where there was no advantage in it, right? Like they had everything to lose. They weren't able to fight back. They just had to sit there, preach Christ crucified, and then accept whatever consequences came their way. They had no means of defense, okay? From the Islamic standpoint, when the followers of Muhammad were dying, okay, even though they were holding fast to what they believed, there's a very fundamental difference. They had more reason to believe in Islam than the Christians did in Christianity, because in Islam, you were allowed to fight back. You were allowed to defend yourself. You were allowed to chop off heads of people, right? There was much to gain in fighting. You were given, if you were successful, not only would you be given a place in paradise, but then you were given, let's say, the women of a village you conquered. You were given money. Definitely. You were given power. All this kind of stuff. There was no incentive here for these people to die as martyrs. Yeah. Okay? So the very nature of the type of faith they must have had to believe in that to the point of losing everything in the process is a far different kind of faith than the faith of men who were willing to die for a religion where they knew they could defend themselves and where they knew that they were constantly chasing power, money, women, all that kind of stuff, okay? Completely different dynamic, and you can't equate them with one another. And as Daniel pointed out, the fact that they were willing to do this for their faith, that tells us enough about what they believed in, and I would say the veracity of it. Because at the end of the day, if you're going to go around saying you saw this guy risen from the dead and be willing to give up everything on behalf of that belief and put yourself through the most torturous situation possible and have nothing to gain from it, at least in this world, that tells you very rigidly what they believed and how confident they were in what they believed, because they knew, as Christ points out, right? Wherever your treasure is, there your heart will be also, right? Yeah. For them, they wanted to store up treasure in heaven. It wasn't about here on earth, the things they could have here on earth. It was about what would happen when Christ would come back, and they could trust and have confidence in him that regardless of the persecution they faced, he would take care of them in the end when he returns.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that was a dumb argument from Yemeni, because why you're dying also, why you're dying is also very important, right?
Exactly.
Uh, a thief may die in the process of stealing. Does it
Yeah.
mean his profession is true? In the
Yeah.
sense, so these guys died for a particular message. That's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
They were bearing the testimony of Jesus Christ, and they had no gain. Just like you said, that changes the game. It's a different ball game altogether.
Yeah.
Apparently, some people say that Luke might have copied from Josephus, but if we look at it, it could have also been the other way around. Josephus may have cited Luke, or both may have cited earlier accounts. The reason being that Luke talks about the destruction of the temple, the prophecy, but he does not talk about the fulfillment, whereas Josephus reports the fulfillment as well, along with other historical aspects. And there is not a full match between Luke and Josephus, so we can't say that Luke copied or
Yeah.
tried to glean from Josephus.
Yeah.
Luke mentioned his sources. He clearly said, how he got from the eyewitnesses. Josephus would not be an eyewitness technically, so Luke doesn't mention citing Josephus. Again, Luke's account is missing elements included by Josephus later. So Luke's account is a genuine account. He was a companion of Paul, and he did his own research with the eyewitnesses to compile the narratives.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Did you have anything there, Adam?
No, I think that summarizes that quite well.
Okay. Yeah. So to summarize all the things that we were discussing till now, even just like Adam said, no one in antiquity ever attributed the Gospels to anyone other than the four traditionally accepted authors. We do not have an alternative tradition. Especially considering the fact that early Christians consistently recognized, identified, condemned false writings, like you brought up Barnabas and those things, Adam. So they condemned the false writings of forgers who tried to credit false gospels to the apostolic eyewitnesses. Traditions of Matthias, for example, was identified as a forgery by early Christians, and was eventually included in a list of forgeries with others like Gospel of Thomas, Peter, by Eusebius, the father of church history.
Yeah.
So if you look at the picture, we have good reasons to believe that the authors were whoever church has attributed to. We know that other ancient documents also failed to identify themselves by name, and we have no contradictory attestation, just like Adam previously pointed out.
Yeah.
So all we have is the authorship that we currently have via the church traditions. The top right point, there were better alternatives than Mark and Luke. Again, the criterion of embarrassment sort of, why would you pick a nobody like Mark and Luke when you have the big shots like Paul, Peter, James, and all those?
Yeah. Like they could have taken one of those, like even the Gospel of Thomas, right?
Yeah.
Right. The idea there's a suggestion that it's like Thomas Didymus, which is like supposed to be the twin brother of Jesus, right?
Mm-hmm.
If that was a tradition that existed, why not go with that? Would that not be far more authoritative than, as you said, Daniel, two essentially nobodies, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Now we come to the unintentional eyewitness support. What we have established so far is that we have evidence within the text where even John testifies that he is the disciple who saw Jesus being pierced on the cross, and then Luke talking about that he collated all the eyewitness accounts. Now we are seeing whatever was collected and written down, can it stand the test of unintentional eyewitness support? This is the quote from the detective that we saw, J. Wallace Warner. He says, "True, reliable eyewitness accounts are never completely parallel and identical." Like if Adam and I say verbatim same thing, it is clear that we both, sat down, we rehearsed our script, and we are saying the same thing.
Yeah.
Instead, they are different pieces of the same puzzle, unintentionally supporting and complementing each other to provide all the details related to what really happened. So just like I gave earlier the example of, if I'm trying to rob a bank, one person may see I have a knife, the other can have a different angle and see that I have a knife and a gun. So that's evident in the gospel accounts. Let's have some examples. We can have a look. Okay, some context here. Harmonization or interpolation. When two or more eyewitness accounts are considered by an investigator, it is the duty of the detective to harmonize the accounts. The details from each account must be assembled without modifying the statements or adding details foreign to the observation of the witnesses. In the end, the final harmony will provide a version of events in which the eyewitnesses can be heard clearly and distinctly, even though they may be providing different details.
Yeah.
Detectives must avoid interpolation, the assertion of additional or extraneous material into the eyewitness record. I think we are extremely blessed that we don't have to do this with the Gospels. We just have to let them speak for themselves.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. The calling of the disciples. This is an unintentional eyewitness corroboration. So if we look at this first example, Matthew 4:18-22, we see that Andrew, his brother, and Simon were casting nets, and suddenly Jesus comes on the scene and he says, I will make you fishers of men. Follow me. Immediately they left their nets and followed him. Does it not sound a bit bizarre, Adam? Some rabbi comes on the scene immediately. He says, follow
just give me
me.
1 second, Daniel. Just give me 2 seconds here. I just need to sort
Yeah.
something, okay?
Sure, yeah. So to carry on with this, if we only take the perspective of Matthew from the Gospel of Matthew, what Matthew saw is true. What Matthew reported is true, but we haven't got the full picture. The full picture comes from another eyewitness, another corroborating testimony, which is found in the book of Luke, as Luke stated right at the beginning of his gospel, that he has labored a lot. He has gathered the details from the eyewitnesses, and for everything that happened in their midst, he sat down, he collated, and he brought it together. Now if we read this narrative, the parallel account from Luke chapter 5, we get an understanding of actually what happened. It says, now it happened while the crowd was pressing around him and listening to the word of God, he was standing by the lake of Gennesaret, and he saw two boats lying at the edge of the lake, but the fishermen had gotten out of them and were washing their nets. And he got into one of the boats, Jesus, which was Simon's, and asked him to put out a little away from the land. And he sat down and began teaching the people from the boat. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, put out into the deep water and let down your nets for a catch. Simon answered and said, Master, we worked hard all night and caught nothing. But I will do as you say and let down the nets. When they had done this, they enclosed a great quantity of fish, and the nets began to break. So they signaled to their partners in the other boat for them to come and help them. And they came and filled both of the boats, so they began to sink. But when Simon Peter saw that, he fell down at Jesus' feet, saying, Go away from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man. For amazement has seized him and all his companions. Who are the companions? The other two people. Amazement had seized him and all his companions because of the catch of the fish which they had taken, and so also were James and John, sons of Zebedee, who were partners with Simon. And Jesus said to Simon, now we get the context. This is the context. So what Matthew said is true and accurate, conveying what happened, but it's a cut short, methodology that he used there. So Jesus said to Simon, do not fear, from now on you will be catching men. And when they had brought their boats to the land, they left everything and followed him. So this is an example of unintentional eyewitness support. Two people saw different things explained in different details, but the end result the same. They're narrating the same thing. And what happened there? The end result, these people ended up following Jesus Christ. One more example would be the striking of Jesus, just like Detective Warner, he mentioned in the video. It says, then they spat in his face and beat him with their fists, and others slapped him and said, prophesy to us, you Christ. who is the one who hit you? Now, if we take this alone, then we will be baffled and it doesn't make sense. The people who are hitting Jesus are right before him. It doesn't make sense for them to say, prophesy who hit you. But when you piece in the puzzle from another eyewitness, another, account, it says, now the men who were holding Jesus in custody were mocking him and beating him, and they blindfolded him. So that's the key. Okay, if he was blindfolded, he could not see who was hitting him, and then it makes sense for them to ask him, prophesy who is the one that is hitting you. We have more unintentional support, like these examples, many undesigned coincidences. For example, in Matthew 8:16, why did they wait until the evening to bring those who needed healing? Mark, when you cross-reference, you find it was the Sabbath. So people only walked specific number of steps on a Sabbath, and they waited until it was evening for them to come home. Welcome back, Adam.
Yeah, I was thinking I was going to give the example. I don't know if you managed to. I actually brought it up earlier. Is that example in Matthew? I think it's in Matthew 26 about some of the people, some of the testimony that's being brought against Jesus during his trial is this guy talked about tearing down the temple and bringing it back up in 3 days. And then in John chapter 2, John gives you the context as to what he was getting, what actually happened versus what the trial was saying. Because that's an interesting detail that more than one of the gospel or the synoptic gospel authors mention, but they don't give you the historical context behind it. Like where did Jesus say that and why did he say that versus this kind of distortion of what he said being brought against him.
Exactly. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. So the other example here is, why did Herod tell his servants he thought Jesus was John the Baptist raised from the dead? Answer again from Luke 8:13, Acts 13:1. Several of Jesus's followers from Herod's household. More unintentional support. Why didn't Pilate find a charge against Jesus, even though Jesus claimed to be a king? Yeah, sometimes I wondered this earlier, but when I read the other gospels, I got to understand. Again, answer from John 18:33-38. Jesus told Pilate his kingdom was not of this world. So he understood that he's not talking about a physical kingdom, and Jesus is not going to fight against the Romans to take over their kingdom. So we'll not be spending much time here, but maybe the last one. Mark 15:43. Why did Mark say Joseph of Arimathea acted boldly? From John, we have the answer. Joseph was previously a secret believer who was in the fear of Jews, but when Jesus died, he stepped out in the open. Okay, so we are talking about the corroboration of the eyewitness accounts. So we are looking at what possible evidence is there that this would be the eyewitness accounts. So unintentional corroboration is a very strong one. It is used in forensic techniques, when people are even trying to solve cold cases. The other one, the extension of the same technique is the corroboration of the language. The gospel write the popular names of the first century Palestine. They also appear to have written in a similar style to those who lived at the time. Non-biblical scraps of papyrus pottery from the first century provide us with samples in the form of Greek popular in the ancient Middle East. The Greek used by the gospel writers is very similar to the vernacular common Greek used by others who lived in this region at that time in history. So that is a corroboration. The writing style, the language matches, the names match. For example, gospel writers referenced names correctly. This is another form of corroboration. Many of the popular Jewish names in Palestine were different from the popular names in Egypt, Syria, or Rome. If the gospel authors had picked up names from Egypt, Syria, we would have known that something is off. But here, the most popular names found in the Gospels just happen to be the most popular names found in Palestine in the first century. Okay, we have a percentage rating here, of the popular names. Then top Jewish men's name in Palestine in that era, in that century. Well, I mean, in that dating when they were written are Simon, Joseph, Eliezer, Judah. Yohanan would be John and Joshua. Then Jewish names in Egypt are Eliezer, Sabbatilius, Joseph, Josephus, Pappus, Ptolemos. So it's a very different name. I think only Joseph matches. But again, this is another form of corroboration. I don't know if you have any comments on this analysis, Adam.
No, it's this is something that was brought up before as an evidence for the historical veracity of these texts. I don't have anything to add, but that's it laid out.
Yeah. Location. Now, the location corroboration. The gospel writers were evidently extremely familiar with the locations they wrote
There's
about.
one, by the way, I don't know if you know this. I need to find this source, but there was a specific scholar who he tried to disprove Luke, right? He targeted Luke for some reason. And what he decided to do was he took the book of Acts, because Acts is very specific in locality and the locations that it gives. So he followed chapter by chapter the locations given in Acts, and he went to all these locations, and then he checked the details in Acts, and he tried to pin them against each other. And then by the end of his research, he came to the conclusion that Luke got everything right, and was like, okay, well, now I have to accept it.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah,
that's good. Yeah. So while the late canonical forgeries written from outside the area of Palestine seldom mention any other city than Jerusalem. So this makes sense, if people are writing after that and the Jerusalem is destroyed, then they would not have much information, access to much information there. But the gospel writers alone include specific names of lesser known first century towns and villages. The gospel writers mention or describe Enon, Arithemia, and you have the list here. I'm not going to read all the names, but Ephraim and all that. Some of these villages are so obscure, only people familiar with the area would even know they existed. I think this is a really powerful point. Like, if you, there would be areas that only I know in my country, some places, or only very select people know because they lived there, they were, raised there, and things like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so what we have till now is we have a corroboration from the inside out. So we have examined the internal critique or internal analysis of the scripture, and we have more reasons to believe that these are indeed eyewitnesses than against them. Then we can look at some external corroborations. In a similar way, ancient observers and writers who were hostile to Christianity reluctantly admitted several key facts corroborating the claims of Christian eyewitnesses, even though they denied Jesus was who he claimed to be. Let's examine some of these reluctant admissions and reconstruct the picture they offer of Jesus. Josephus. Josephus he lived around 37 to 101, and he described Jesus. So, are you familiar with this, Adam?
I know of his what's it called? I think it's either in Antiquity of the Jews or it's in the Flavium Testimonium. I know he talks about the what's called the crucifixion of Jesus. He says something to the effect of that he was a wise man, if anyone could call him a man, whom the authorities decided it would be best if he be crucified. And then his followers continued to kind of persevere with this belief that he was the Son of God. That's a very dirty paraphrase of what he says in it, but it's something along those lines.
Yeah. So there was a controversy also regarding the Josephus's writing. Apparently, some Christian scribes got hold of some manuscripts and they tried to add things. But this, what I'm presenting, is not one of those alterations. The reference is here. In 1971, Shlomo Pines, scholar of ancient languages and distinguished professor at Hebrew University of Jerusalem, he published a long-lost 10th century Arabic text written by Melkite bishop of Hierapolis named Agapius. This Arabic leader quoted Josephus and did so in the Arabic language, unlike the Greek language used by other authors from antiquity. Scholars believe this version best reflects Josephus' original text. So we can have a look at what Josephus said. So Adam is right on that. At this time, there was a wise man called Jesus, and his conduct was good, and he was known to be virtuous. Many people from among the Jews and other nations became his disciples. Okay, so he's confirming the existence of Jesus. And the next one, Pilate condemned him to be crucified and die. So we have the crucifixion confirmation as well. This is external corroboration, again, for anybody listening. And those who had become his disciples did not abandon his discipleship. They reported that he had appeared to them 3 days after his crucifixion, and he was alive. Accordingly, he was perhaps the Messiah concerning whom the prophets have recounted wonders. So this is found in Agapius Kitab al-Unwan, chapter 2, 15 to 16. Also, a lesser known fact about Josephus. Do you know the connections of Josephus to the high priest?
I don't know. This is not something I know specifically.
Yeah, it's amazing, once we, because people like this guy, the detective, he dig into all this, he researched. People from atheistic backgrounds, when they let them, wherever the evidence leads, when they commit to follow, they come to the truth, they come to Christ. Now look at Josephus' connection. He has a direct familial and social connection to the high priesthood. And why does it matter? Because it is the high priest that apparently, instigated the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. Josephus explicitly boasts of his elite lineage in those books, Life, Vita, Antiquities. Priestly descent, he has a paternal line, belong to the order of Jehoiarib. So he calls himself a fourth generation descendant of a high priest. Then royal priestly bloodline. Through his mother, he is connected to the Hasmonean dynasty, which monopolized the high priesthood and kingship for generations. This gave him aristocratic status in Jerusalem's temple elite. The last one, maybe you can read the last one, Adam, because that's where the meat is.
Yeah. So in the 50s, 60s CE, Josephus moved among Jerusalem's ruling class. He interacted frequently with the first men of the city, including high priestly families. Critically, he served under Ananus II, a high priest who commanded forces in the Jewish revolt and was son of Ananus I. And then this is Ananus of the Gospels, John 18:13. Ananus the first son-in-law was Caiaphas, high priest during Jesus' trial. Josephus does operate within the very priestly dynasty linked to the events surrounding Jesus' arrest and execution.
Yeah, so he has the first-hand accounts of the two key people who were present when Jesus was condemned to death. So it's not like he's getting from somewhere else. He has some direct connection, and his account is reliable when he mentions here that Pilate condemned him to be crucified and die.
Yeah.
At least that part, we can take it to the bank.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the scholarly interpretation as well, by the way, just for those who don't know. Ehrman pointed this out because what Muslims try to do, again, they have to try and do something, right, to further their cause, even if it means kind of perverting certain facts or let's call interpretations that we have today. But basically, with Josephus, because Ehrman has a video on this, he points out the fact that when it comes to that specific quotation of Josephus, the part where he talks about the crucifixion of Jesus, the scholarly consensus is that is authentic to Josephus.
Yeah.
That is his actual writing. And that's not really deliberated. That's the majority view. There are two other hypotheses, but those two other hypotheses are the minority view. So to give the grand scale of what's going on here, there's three main interpretations as to this specific writing. One of them is that it's complete interpolation on the part of Jewish or Christian scribes who got a hold of his writings, which is what Daniel mentioned at the start. That's one interpretation. That's the least number of scholars go with that. You have another interpretation, which is that it is entirely authentic to Josephus. I mean, the entire writing itself is authentic to Josephus. There are some scholars that suggest that could be the case, but they are a minority. The majority position is what's called partial interpolation, which is that there are aspects of this specific passage that are original to Josephus, but then on top of that, inserted are some interpolations by, again, probably Christian, let's say, groups or missionaries or whatever. But in context here, from the majority standpoint is the partial part, the last one that I suggested, which is that there's aspects of this that may be interpolated, but the part that is concrete, and certainly from Josephus, is the part that mentions the crucifixion, because it lines up stylistically speaking in the original language with how Josephus wrote anyway. So from their standpoint, that has credibility to it, and the majority view is that is Josephus.
Yeah. And that's why we chose to present this particular version, which is in Arabic. Apparently, it escaped the corruption in the Greek when the scribes were trying to get a hold of it. Then we have Thales. Maybe you can take this one as well. You're familiar with this, I suppose.
This one has come up as well, yeah. Thales was a Samaritan historian who wrote an expansive 3-volume account of the history of the Mediterranean area in the middle of the 1st century, only 20 years after Jesus' crucifixion. Another historian, Sextus Julius Africanus, wrote a text entitled History of the World in AD 221. However, the Africanus quoted an important passage from Thales' original account. Thales chronicled the alleged crucifixion of Jesus and offered an explanation for the darkness observed at the time of Jesus' death. Africanus briefly described Thales' explanation. This is a beautiful quote, by the way. On the whole world, there pressed a most fearful darkness, and the rocks were rent by an earthquake, and many places in Judea and other districts were thrown down. This darkness, Thales, in the 3rd book of the history, calls, as appears to me, without reason, an eclipse of the sun. And the other thing as well is, we have a record today, I don't know if you know this, Daniel, of when all the past eclipses would have happened based on solar alignment.
Oh, yeah.
And the thing is, even from an astronomical standpoint, from an astrology standpoint, let's just say, it is agreed that, yes, at the time of Christ's crucifixion, it does line up with the potential eclipse of the sun that would have happened during his time. So there's that as well. But anyway, Thales is commenting on what actually happened from a historical standpoint, which is very interesting.
Yeah. So there's a documentary called The Star of Bethlehem. Anybody, can watch it. They show us clearly how the stars were aligned and what, in Genesis, Revelation chapter 12, I think it talks about the positioning of the stars. You can know the position of the stars at the birth of Jesus, how they were in orbit and line. And also these events also we can know, just like you said. So it is amazing how, signs are available in the created order that points to Jesus Christ. Then we have Tacitus, Cornelius Tacitus. I think we just talked about him earlier as well, that, his name was not on the documents, but still he was there. So this is what he said. Christus, from whom the name had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of one of our procurators, Pontius Pilatus. I mean, how clear can it get when you are getting a Roman, government record detailing who crucified and who got crucified?
Yeah.
Talmud. Okay, so if Jesus was not, I think it's also a very good corroboration, Adam. How did Jesus make it into the Talmud if he was not crucified or condemned as a false prophet?
Yeah, that's a really good point.
It says, Jesus practiced magic and led Israel astray. Then on the right-hand side, they say that, on the day before the Passover, they hanged Jesus. And a herald went before him for 40 days, proclaiming he will be stoned because he practiced magic and enticed Israel away. Let anyone who knows anything in his favor come forward and plead for him. But nothing was found in his favor, and they hanged him on the day before the Passover. So again, the skeptics need to answer for this. We have external corroboration, external attestation. Mara Bar Serapion. Have you heard of this as well?
Yeah, the name rings a bell. I can't remember exactly what it says, but the name definitely rings a bell.
Yeah. You could read this probably, Adam.
Would you like me to start from what advantage?
Oh, yeah, just that one probably. Yeah.
What advantage did the Athenians gain from putting Socrates to death? Famine and plague came upon them as a judgment for their crime. What advantage did the men of Samos gain from burning Pythagoras? In a moment, their land was covered with sand. What advantage did the Jews gain from executing their wise king? It was just after that their kingdom was abolished. God justly avenged these three wise men. The Athenians died of hunger. The Samians were overwhelmed by the sea. The Jews, ruined and driven from their land, live in complete dispersion. I'll just stop there. But yeah.
Yeah, I think the
Oh, but
only
then you have at the end there, you have, nor did the wise king die for good. He lived on in the teaching which he had given.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's very clear. The executed king, and then immediately the judgment on Jerusalem. So it's talking about
Yeah.
Jesus. Phlegon. Again, this is another record. This guy, Julius Africanus. He again reported a historian in the Phlegon named Phlegon, who penned a record of history in approximately 140 AD.
Yeah.
And he records again regarding the earthquakes. I'll read the second part, I guess, maybe from the first. Phlegon records that in the time of Tiberius Caesar, at full moon, there was a full eclipse of the sun. I think that is full noon probably, because Jesus was crucified 9 o'clock, 12 there was earthquake. There was a full eclipse of the sun from the 6th hour to the 9th. He imagined also that both the earthquake and darkness were an invention. He's reporting about someone else. But regarding these, we have in the preceding pages made our defense according to our ability, adducing the testimony of Phlegon, who relates these events took place at the time when our Savior suffered. Okay, so we have completed at least two parts. Maybe we can stop here. I don't know if you're getting late, Adam.
For me, it's okay, but if you want to make two parts out of this, we can make two parts out of it as well. Whatever you think would be beneficial.
No, we are actually closer to the end, so that maybe since you have time, we can just finish it.
Yeah, we can finish it off.
Yeah. So there were 4 points that we started with. Dating, were they present, and then are the witnesses corroborated? Was the second point. We saw how the testimony works. This is the third one. Were they accurate over time? So how can we be sure the biblical documents we have today are accurate and reliable? How do we know they haven't been corrupted over time and contain little more than fiction? Like the cold case investigations, we need certainty in two important areas of investigation. First, we need to make sure we know what the gospel said in the first place. Second, we need to know if there is good reason to believe these documents were well preserved over time. So that's what we will have a look at. Chain of custody. We also have a chain of custody, isnad, for the gospels. We have several chains of custody revealing what the apostles observed and taught. In fact, we could comfortably reconstruct an accurate image of Jesus from just the letters of the students of the apostles, even if all scripture was lost to us. Yeah. So the picture here, for anybody, why does it matter? Because that's when the canon was, kind of solidified from Jesus to the Council of Laodicea. So, all the apostles, they made their disciples and they carried the tradition forward. They carried their letters and information. So if we look at John's lineage, we have, from Jesus, Apostle John got his information. Then he taught Ignatius, Polycarp, and Polycarp, Ignatius, they handed over to Irenaeus, and Irenaeus handed it over to Hippolytus. So 70 AD, 110, 185, 220. But we don't have all the way up to the, the Council of Laodicea. Let's have a look at other people. Paul's lineage. We have Apostle Paul, martyred in the 60s. Then he has disciples as Linus, Clement. Oh, by the way, I forgot to... Sorry. Yeah, so from Apostle John, when we look at Ignatius and Polycarp, they have the number of books/letters, we can say. Ignatius has written about 7 to 16 books. Polycarp has about 14 to 16 books/letters, we can say. Irenaeus has also written 24. Hippolytus has written 24. So those documents, have been available in history. Then you look at life of Jesus, Apostle Paul. So Paul mentored Linus. Clement of Rome is quite famous, I believe. He has 7 books.
Yeah.
And then the disciples through them are these people: Evaristus in the 180, Sixtus 120, Hyginus 135, Alexander 110, Telesphorus 130, Pius 150, and then Justin Martyr in the 160s. Justin Martyr has 5 books. Then Tatian, I don't know how to pronounce that, AD 175, he has 20 books. So, information is being written, passed, it's trickling down, being handed over from individual discipleship. So in the early church, individual discipleship was a prominent role. People learned by association and connection.
Yeah.
But still, again, we are not reaching all the way, but we do have these nuggets or this information that is being saved through letters and books.
Yeah.
So Tatian, just to hear for our context, this person at the end, Tatian 175, 20 books. When Justin died, Tatian was driven from the church in Rome. He traveled to Syria and eventually wrote his famous contribution, the Diatessaron, a biblical paraphrase or harmony which recognized the existence of 4 eyewitness accounts of the Gospels. So let's look back at his timing. 175, at least 175, we have a corroboration of at least the existence of 4 eyewitness Gospels. And he sought to combine them into one document. The earliest church records in Syria trace back to Tatian, identify an early canon, including the Diatessaron, the letters of Paul, and the book of Acts. Tatian's work, combined with this ancient canonical list, acknowledges the early formation of the canon in the chain of custody from Paul to the late 2nd century. So we're seeing some kind of a chain, right, Adam? Information, letters, books are being propagated and carried forward. And here, early evidence of some kind of canonization.
Yeah.
Peter's lineage. Sorry, you saying something?
No, I was just agreeing with you.
Yeah. So Peter's lineage, maybe this is why Catholics, want to claim this. Look at that. Mark, so Peter mentored Mark. Then we have Avilus in 95, Annius 75, Kedron 100, Primus 115, Justus 130, Pantanius 195, Clement 210, 22 books. So Clement has 22 books here. Origen 27 books, 250 AD. Pamphilus, and then Eusebius, I think is 335. He wrote 27 books, and that reaches all the way to the Council of Laodicea. So when you look at these 3 streams, Adam, the disciples of John, disciples of Paul, disciples of Peter, we have so much information written there. And hence the quote that even if we lost all the Gospels, just by the writings of the descendants of the apostles and the apostles, we can actually reconstruct at least minimal facts about Jesus.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the core understanding, like just so people understand what Daniel's saying, the core message of the Gospels, as preserved in the Gospels, if we didn't have the Gospels, could be 100% accurately recreated from all these extra biblical writings that we have by these followers up until the Council of Laodicea. So what does that tell you about the strength of the evidence?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So the isnad that Muslims talk about, we have that, we have the unbroken chain corroborated. So this is what the detective calls the chain of custody. If the chain of custody is broken, the evidence may be unreliable. But here we are seeing that we have multiple streams or chains of custody where information was preserved and passed down. Now we come to the problem of, some people might say that, you have so many textual variants, the original message might be lost. So we have a very good example here to understand that how having a plethora of variants does not cause you to lose the message, but rather to hone in on the right message. If we start from the left side, maybe you can read this, Adam. We can comment as we go.
Yeah, so it's less meat at Starving on Main Street at PM. Can you order me an Americano with an extra shot if you get there first? I don't understand.
Yeah, so I say I don't understand. Then we move to the next screen.
Let's meet at Starving on Main Street at PM. Can you order me an Americano with an extra shot if you get there first. I don't understand. And then it's let's meet at Starbucks on Main Street at PM. Can you order me an Americano with an extra shot if you get there first?
Yeah.
I don't
So what's
understand.
happening here is I'm making a typo, typing error, a scribal mistake I'm making, and I'm trying to correct it.
Yeah. Let's meet at Starbucks on Main Street at PM. Can you order me an Americano with an extra shot if you get there first? Let's meet at Starbucks on Main Street at 2 p.m. Can you order me an Amrico with an extra shot if you get there first? Let's meet at Starbucks on Main Street at 2 p.m. Can you order me an Amrico with an extra shot if you get there first? Let's meet at Starved on Main Street at 2 p.m. Can you order me an Americano with an extra shot if you get there first?
Yeah. So like I made you read because I have read this, so I know what it is. Now, since you're reading it for the first time, what is the message you're getting, Adam? What do you think the
It's
core of
really
the
good,
message?
right? It's really good because you have all these variants, okay?
Mhm.
But what you'll notice is that if you put them all side by side, you can accurately reconstruct what the actual message is saying, right? So it's not let's meet at starving. It's obviously let's meet, if you're talking about Starbucks, the place, which is on Main Street at a specific time, can you order me an Americano with an extra shot if you get there first?
Mhm.
That allows you, all these variants allow you to perfectly recreate exactly what the message was, which is why it's important.
Yeah. So this is the original message as Adam has deciphered, right? Let's meet at Starbucks on Main Street at 2 p.m. Can you order me an Americano with an extra shot if you get there first?
Yeah.
That's how, the plethora of manuscripts that we have for the Christian, documents helps us. We are not getting lost, but we are getting the more accurate message as to what the original message would be. And this would also be the reason skeptics like Bart Ehrman, other textual critics, are able to say that this is not the original. If they're able to say this is not the original, then they would be able to say what is the original as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, let's see. Again, this is a funny face. I remember the interview with, Apostate Prophet and Hijab, where he was laughing sarcastically.
Yeah.
So yeah, so people who quote Bart Ehrman saying that his findings do any damage to Christianity or the faith, this is what he said: textual variants do not change doctrine. His quote is verbatim: "The position I argue for in misquoting Jesus does not actually stand at odds with Professor Metzger's position that the essential Christian beliefs are not affected by textual variants in the manuscript tradition of the New Testament."
Yeah.
Yeah, meaning just like what we saw an example here, that only shows us that we can get to the accurate message like so when we have all these variants.
Yeah.
So on step number 3, we can actually say that yes, we believe we have sufficient evidence to lean towards that. Yes, the message has been maintained, the message has been passed along with a high degree of accuracy and preservation.
Yeah.
Then these are some of the manuscripts, the earliest full manuscripts that we have. Paul's letters are all in the early 200s, 250s, I would say, as we have the dating here. Yeah, and then Codex Vaticanus, just like we saw the Council of Laodicea, we have the complete Pauline corpus by that time. Then Sinaiticus Alexandrius, we have the full copies by that time, up till the 400, 440 AD.
The other thing as well, this is a very minor side thing, but it's something that I'm actually interested in kind of looking into a little bit more in the future. But there's a library called the Library of Alexandria, which was one of the earliest libraries for the Christian manuscripts during the early church. But sadly, what ended up happening was, I don't know if you know this, Daniel, it was invaded by Muslims. Around the 7th or 8th century, and when whatever they found in there, they didn't like it, and then everything was destroyed. But the commonly held belief is that library probably contained the actual original first century manuscripts. But as I said, when Muslims came in and they saw the manuscripts there, they just decided they destroyed everything that was in there. And this was one of the oldest libraries that the earliest followers of Jesus had as a place to keep these manuscripts, and they had kept them for so long over the centuries.
Wow. Yeah, that's a sad thing. I think there's also another popular, I think, library or institution, Hagia Sophia, I think that's called, the Eastern Orthodox. When Muslims came in, that was taken over and turned into a mosque. There could have been some manuscripts there as well.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see what we have. Yeah, so just the datings of the different manuscripts. Some of the fragments are very early, like Matthew's. We have some fragments of chapter 21, some verses from there. Then the Gospel of John, again, some remnants. Okay, final question. Okay, having said all these things, we need to come to the motivation of these people. So the fourth pillar in the investigation was bias. If a person has bias, then they would have an inclination to press towards certain things. This is the quote from the Detective J. Warner Wallace. In all my years investigating homicides, I have learned only 3 broad motives lie at the heart of any murder. As it turns out, these 3 motives are also the same driving forces behind other types of misbehavior. They are the reasons why we sometimes think that we shouldn't think, say what we shouldn't say, or do what we shouldn't do. Again, the Apostle John brings this out, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. It's also connected here. So he's saying broadly, these are the 3 motivations everybody has. All crimes fit into: money, financial greed, sex, sexual desire, relational desire, and power, the pursuit of power. So if we analyze the apostles within this framework, we need to see, is there any reason to believe that they were in any of these 3 different frameworks where they were trapped by this, these desires, and hence they were motivated to do certain things? Apostolic motivation. Okay. Yeah, you can read this, Adam.
Did the alleged eyewitnesses of Jesus' life and ministry have an ulterior motive when writing the Gospels? Do we have any good reason to believe the apostles were driven to lie by one of the 3 motives we have described? And the answer to that is obviously no.
Yeah.
There's nothing in history, neither Christian history nor secular history, to suggest the disciples had anything to gain from their testimony related to Jesus. In fact, it was completely the opposite.
Yeah, I mean, even in secular history, there are no accusations against the apostles,
Yeah, and that's why, just for those who are wondering, that's why even Ehrman will say the earliest followers of Jesus did perceive to have seen him risen from the dead. They firmly believe that. Like, even from a secular standpoint, it is agreed by a number of scholars that yes, it's more than reasonable to suggest they certainly believed in what they had seen, because there is no ulterior motive at play here, right? They would only go as far as they did, knowing there was nothing to gain, at least in this world, if they firmly believed that they had everything to gain in the next world. Okay, and they would have to have sufficient reason to believe that in the first place. And the commonly held idea is that yes, in their mind, they had certainly believed they'd seen Jesus risen from the dead, which is what motivated them to go as far as they went.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay, so the first question is the first issue was, were the apostles driven by financial gain?
Judas was, but he was corrupt, so.
Yeah. And that's why, he lost the apostleship, in the sense that, he fell away and another had to take its place.
Yeah. But the true apostles, no.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So we have quotes from people like, coming from the top left: "Behold, we have left our homes, Luke 18:28. The disciples quote this or say this to Jesus, that they left everything to follow Jesus. Then we have in Acts 3:6, Peter and John, they look at the paralyzed man and they say, "Silver and gold I do not have, but such as I have I give you," and they heal that man. Again, talking about that, they are not after the money, neither were they, going after the money. Paul says multiple times, "I am poor yet making many rich, as having nothing yet possessing all things." Then 1 Corinthians 4:11, both hungry and thirsty, poor and clothed, roughly treated and homeless. Now, James, again, James, the brother of Jesus, I believe this is. Now, listen, you rich people, weep and wail because of the misery that is coming on you. When you look at the quotes by these people, Peter, James, John, Paul, we don't see that they are after money. They're not asking for offerings. They're not asking for waging wars or nothing like that. What is your analysis on this in this particular financial gain, Adam?
Yeah, and the other interesting thing about it is even in the Gospels themselves and in Acts, when it becomes about money, that's that issue is addressed. Like you have, for example, I think is it in Matthew 9 where Jesus says, for example, I think it's Matthew 9 where Jesus says you can't serve two masters, right? Man cannot serve both Mammon and God, right? And then you have in Acts. Matthew 6, rather. My apologies. It's in Matthew 6, I think,
Matthew
not
6,
9. I think. Because Luke 6 is... Yeah, it's Matthew 6. My apologies. In Acts, then you have a situation where one of the potential followers of Jesus is supposed to give... again, I'm vaguely remembering it here, so I might get some of the details incorrect. But they're asked to give a portion of what they earn as kind of an offering. And what ends up happening is this person withholds a certain amount, and then when I think it's Peter asks him directly, "Did you give what you said you gave?" And he said, "Yeah, I gave. I gave everything. I gave everything that I had." Now it turns out he didn't, and Peter knew that he didn't.
Yeah,
and then he's punished. He's punished for that, and then I think his wife does the same thing. She does something, and then she's punished by death. Okay, but the idea here was, as Daniel has pointed out, and as these gospel authors continuously point out, they're not fueled by money here. They're not driven by money, and those that were driven by money were punished and called out for that.
Yeah,
which tells you their mentality.
Yeah, and also there was the early teaching in the church. I think it's called Didache, where there were specific instructions if somebody is. Yeah, if an apostle comes and stays longer than specific period, he needs to be sent away. And if they come and ask money, then we need to know that they're the false, like wolves in sheep's clothing.
Yeah,
things like that. So it was very strict about financial things and keeping themselves clean. Paul also said, I labored with my own hands. I did not become a burden to you guys.
Yeah.
So I think we can clear the apostles on the first level. The financial gain was not their motivation. Yeah, the second thing. By the way, what about Muhammad right here and his disciples?
I mean, it was all about money, because when they were doing caravan raids, they were taking booty, right, which was loot. And part of the reason for that was he had to build up his resources to make him a more effective and a more feared and a more controlling war general. And the more resources that you have, the more effective you can be in doing that. So when they were going in and they were raiding caravans or raiding villages, what were they doing? They were killing everyone that got in their way and taking all the resources for themselves. So they were absolutely driven by that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, the second one was sex or relationships. So as we can see, there are again many quotes from the within the letters as well. But first of all, from the pictures, they had many believing wives. They were married men. They had a license to marry, meaning they were not forced to be obstinate, so they will do wrong things. They can marry if they want to marry.
Yeah.
They took their wives with them again.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then we have many instructions where Paul says, it is better not to burn, but if you are having trouble, you better get married, and things like that. So we have a lot of instructions, and Paul talks about again monogamy. Jesus talked about monogamy.
Yeah.
Paul talked about monogamy in his instructions to the church bishops. He said, a bishop must have one wife, and laid out other criteria as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and again, there is no blame by anybody again on the apostles regarding this in history or in secular history or church history.
Yeah. And a lot of, by the way, just so that people know, I mean, a lot of the church fathers didn't marry for the purpose of. It's not that they weren't allowed to. That's not the argument. The argument is more so in line with what Paul was saying. And from their perspective, it's like, well, if I'm a bishop of a church and I'm supposed to represent Christ, then my focus needs to be entirely on Christ. And that needs to be the center of everything for me and in how I drive or how I lead the church. So a lot of the time, some of them just wouldn't marry for the purpose of dedicating their entire self and life to Christ and the church. And that was a common pathology that was found in the early church. It's not that they couldn't; they just made that choice consciously. That's very different from Islam, which is like, it's like, how many wives can I get, right? How many wives am I gonna get on top of those wives in the next, in the life to come when I get to Jannah? Like it's
Yeah.
driven by that,
That's true.
Whereas in Christianity, it's more so, as Daniel pointed out, it's a union that God institutes for people to address part of the passions that we have innately as human creatures, but doing it in a godly way. But simultaneously, there is a type of life that's there for celibacy, which is if you want to commit yourself to that degree where it's all about God and only about God and the church, you can also do that. That doesn't exist in Islam. In Islam, it's like, no, you're looking to get married and you're looking to get as many wives as you want because you're driven by that motivation.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. All right. The pursuit of power, this is also really strong motivation. We see empires rise and fall when, excessive power is being, when the leader is pursuing excessive power. So, like, which of the apostles had a pursuit of power? Can we put anybody in this framework?
No.
We can put Nero in this. We can put Herod in this.
Yep.
And so all the other people, they had a degree of leadership. We can put what you call the Jerusalem Jewish leaders as well in this category.
The other thing that's interesting as well, Daniel, if you really think about it, Paul was very influential during his time. He was highly regarded among all these churches.
Absolutely.
Like Paul could have twisted things if he wanted to become a very kind of power-hungry, orientated, authoritative figure where he has everything done for him and everything made easy for him. But he doesn't choose that, does he? Even in spite of the high regard with which these people were holding him, Paul was willing to be thrown in prison if necessary for the gospel. Live shipwrecked if required. Live by whatever means they found themselves in whatever dangerous situation they came to. Like Paul was willing to face all of that, which is very strange because if he wanted to, as I was arguing, he was influential enough that he could have had a very safe life if he really thought about it and really went down that direction. But he didn't. It wasn't about that for him. It was purely about one thing and one thing only, which is preach Christ crucified, even if it means I die in the process.
Yeah, exactly. He actually makes that statement, do I not have a right to take a living and marry a wife? Take a wife and things like that. Then he talks about giving and receiving. He just did not just receive offerings, but he also gave offerings.
Yeah.
And he lived in their midst and he worked with his own hands. Like he lived an exemplary life, for a man of his caliber. He lived a very decent life and, low life, like humble in heart is what I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, they did not exert that power. They did not lord it over their, followers, is what we can say, just like Jesus said. So like if like for example, this is what we looked at: money, sex, and power. These are the like the axis of evil. It is revolving around this. And when we see the apostles were not within that framework, then we are safe to assume that they did not have an inherent bias, that they needed something to say something to achieve something. Rather, they were only witnesses, just like Jesus chose them to be witnesses.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is the conclusion here. Yeah, we can conclude with this, Adam. You can read this out.
Okay. So motive is a key factor jurors must assess when evaluating the reliability of witnesses. That's why judges advise jurors to ask questions like, was the witness promised immunity or leniency in exchange for his or her testimony? We need to know if something other than the simple desire to report the truth motivated the witnesses to say what they said. As we examine the motives of the gospel writers, it's clear the forces typically compelling people to lie didn't drive the authors. The apostles were free from ulterior motive. But what about bias? Even if they didn't possess one of these three self-serving motives, how do we know the gospel authors weren't simply biased? Judges encourage jurors to find out if the witness was influenced by a factor such as bias or prejudice, a personal relationship with someone involved in the case, or a personal interest in how the case is decided. If a witness had preconception or partiality as he or she watched the event, that bias must have influenced how the witness interpreted what they saw. Bias can cause people to see something incorrectly. Was this the case with the apostles?
Yeah, that's a question we leave the audience with.
Yeah.
You do your own research. Today we have presented a lot. You can rewatch it if you want. So it's the writing is on the wall. It's very clear. They had the purest of motives, and we have a continuity. We have the message being preserved and propagated, and the testimony is for all to see.
Yeah.
I'll just stop sharing this. Yeah, I think that was a good stream. Yeah, this is the video that we watched at the beginning. That's where we so to answer. I mean, we don't need to answer Korra anything right now, because the evidence that we presented, it speaks for itself, and there are volumes there. Okay, so before we wrap up, do you have any final words, Adam?
No, I just as I say every time we do this stream, I just pray that the people watching take seriously the stuff that we said and investigate it, because I think again, for us, this is our sole motivation here, right? Just as Paul and the apostles preached Christ crucified, it's the same motivation that drives us. But at the end of the day, people can freely make a choice, but we're nudging you in the direction of what we believe for all the right reasons, with all the correct evidence, that this is what the truth is. The truth is Christ Jesus, and the truth cannot be found apart from him. And that's what we're hoping, by God's grace, that you may be led to, in Jesus' name.
Amen. Amen.
Yeah.
Thanks everyone for joining. God bless.
God bless everyone.